Good afternoon, everybody. We'll give just a moment for the Zoom room to populate. Bear with us just for a second. All right, we'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're Zooming in from. My name is Paul Colby. I'm Director of the Intelligence Project at the Harvard Kennedy School Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. It gives me great pleasure today to open up, provide some initial remarks for our half-day seminar on climate change, intelligence, and global security. The timing for this is great, coming during Earth Week and coming during the climate summit hosted by the Biden administration, which has resulted in some significant announcements over the last few days. And I think the question of how intelligence agencies, both US and international, as well as in private sector, can help answer the requirements that are going to be deriving from efforts to combat climate change, and in particular, the global security, stability issues which are affected by climate change. This session is co-sponsored by the Belfer Center's Environment and Natural Resources Program, and notably by colleagues at the Center for Climate Security. Yesterday, during the climate summit, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines stated that climate change is at the top of the foreign policy agenda for the United States. And this echoes what we've been hearing from across agencies and from the president. President himself talked optimistically about climate change being an issue that even geopolitical rivals and adversaries can find room to cooperate on. Michael Bloomberg talked about the criticality of information for businesses and cities. And so we get to the question of how is the intelligence community in the US going to support the requirements that are coming out from the president, from Secretary Kerry, from the military, and from our friends and allies around how we mitigate the impact of climate change, how we anticipate the threats that will derive from it, and how we use our national resources across the spectrum, not just to understand the science and the phenomenology of it, but to understand the human impact and impact specifically on our own national security. We want to think about how not only the intelligence community can support this effort, but what other structures, international, transnational, private sector, academia, might and must play a role on this as well. We've got 4 panels today to explore these issues, followed by keynote remarks by Secretary Kerry, Special Presidential Climate Envoy. 4 panels today. We'll be starting off with the first one that's exploring the direct and indirect impacts of climate change to national security. What are the different things that we can anticipate and see that will affect our military readiness, that affect our economic competitiveness, affect populations in the US and across the world in terms of migration, food scarcity, water resources, et cetera, as well as unanticipated impacts that we might think about. Second panel, we'll be looking at a bit of a retrospective on what the history of intelligence community activity has been with regards to climate change. What have we written about, talked about, advocated before, what resources have been used and not used, and looking a bit at the current state of play. And our third panel will be to look ahead a bit to imagine what new structures within government and outside of government might be needed to support policymaker, decision maker requirements across government, across private sector, across businesses in anticipating and responding to climate change impact. And then finally, we're going to specifically take a look at what the role and contributions of the private sector can be in our fourth panel, with some representatives from businesses who provide not only intelligence capability in terms of data collection and analysis capability, but some thoughts on how businesses are thinking about this as well. And then finally, we'll conclude with remarks by Secretary Kerry. So we're looking forward to Great set of discussions, good questions from the audiences, and some provocative comments and some innovative thinking around this. I want to introduce two folks who've been absolutely instrumental in putting this together. First, Erin Sikorsky. Raise your hand, Erin. Erin is Deputy Director of the Center for Climate and Security. She's Director of the International Military Council on Climate and Security. She's formerly Deputy Director of the Strategic Futures Group at the NIC, the National Intelligence Council. So she brings deep, long, substantive expertise on this issue. Delighted to have Erin speaking with us today. We also have Kristen Wood, non-resident fellow at the Intelligence Project at the Belfer Center. 20-year CIA veteran, worked in the directorates of analysis, of operations, and at the Digital Innovation Center, which makes her a rather unusual cat in having covered so many different core areas of the CIA. Notably, she's co-author of a series of articles which appeared in the Cipher Brief over the last few months, exploring different aspects of climate change and national security. And these articles have served as somewhat of a basis for the discussions that we'll be having today. So delighted to have Kristen with us as well. Throughout the day, we've got a great lineup of folks that are in government and out of government, that are in private sector, that are in academia, folks that bring scientific expertise, geographic expertise, substantive expertise across all of these issues. So we look forward to some great discussions. With that, I'd like to turn over the mic to Erin, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Erin.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. I'm so happy to be here today. It's a great way to cap off a really big week for climate change and climate issues. The Center for Climate and Security is thrilled to partner with the Belfer Center on this conference. As many of you may know, the Center for Climate and Security has worked for over a decade to illuminate the links between climate change and security. And we've done this through research into the issue, through developing policy recommendations based on that research, and I think most importantly, through building a community of practice here in the United States and around the globe of researchers and academics, practitioners and policymakers all coming together to work on these issues and advance them within the halls of government. In early 2020, the Center for Climate and Security released a security threat assessment of global climate change, which looked at two different scenarios for climate change, a curbed warming scenario of about 2 degrees Celsius warming and an uncurbed scenario of 4 degrees Celsius. And what the report found was that even at scenarios of low warming, each region of the world will face severe risks to national and global security over the next 3 decades. Higher levels of warming will pose catastrophic and likely irreversible global security risks over the course of the 21st century. And I know our first panel today is going to really dig into what those risks look like. The findings of that report, though, underscore the importance, I think, of a two-pronged approach to climate security. First, focusing on strategies to manage the climate risks already baked in. Even if we went to net zero emissions tomorrow, we still have challenges with which to contend. And there's a key role, I think, here for the intelligence community in helping governments think through what those risks are. The second prong of the approach, though, is that the world must also commit to cutting emissions to avoid the catastrophic and frankly unmanageable, unadaptable security risks of a high warming scenario. So those are the two sides of the climate security coin. So the question for today's conference is, how do we move from identifying the problem, something we who've served in the intelligence community are really good at, to taking action? How can countries address these security risks? And specifically, what role can and should the IC play in doing so? How do we redefine national security in the intelligence mission to manage transnational and actorless threats like climate change? And as Paul mentioned, as we heard yesterday at the Biden administration's Climate Leaders Summit, these are the kind of questions that US security institutions and partners and allies around the globe are grappling with. During the security panel at the summit chaired by Secretary of Defense Austin, I was heartened to hear Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines say, and I quote, "To address climate change properly, it must be at the center of a country's national security and foreign policy. And as such, it needs to be fully integrated with every aspect of our analysis to not only monitor the threat, but also critically think to ensure that policymakers understand the implication of climate change on seemingly unrelated policies. That to me is the key. And I think today we're going to dig deeper into what this could look like in practice. We've got an all-star lineup. I can't wait to get started. And thanks again to the Belfer Center and all of you for joining us today. Over to you, Kristen.
Thanks so much, Erin and Paul. Like both of you, I'm just thrilled to be here today to have this conversation. It's a dialogue that comes, as everyone has said, on the heels of the White House Climate Leaders Summit, and with some really exciting conversations that took place yesterday, and that will lead to more actions and more conversation over the coming days. I think we feel very, 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 very fortunate to have partnered with the Center for Climate and Security on this. As Erin noted, and we'll be able to talk with several of our panelists in the first session, is these experts have been following these issues for decades and have watched the dialogue change from this is a new topic to here the point we are now. So we're very excited to get started on this. But I would be remiss if I didn't take a minute to publicly thank Caitlin Chase. She's the project coordinator for the Intelligence Project at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. And she has made every part of today's seminar happen, from every bit of logistics to making sure she got us all set and organized. So Caitlin, thank you, thank you, thank you for what you did to pull this together. It was just nothing short of amazing. So Paul, do you want to go back to you?
No, let's lead right off, Kristen.
Excellent. So session one, an overview of climate change as a threat to international security. And I am so honored to be able to moderate this first panel, because each of our panelists is representative of the deep expertise we have in all of today's seminar sessions. The way we plan to go forward today in session one is I'll introduce each panelist, and they will share with us about 5 minutes of remarks on their perspective in the way that climate change is a threat to international security. Obviously, this is an enormous issue, and we won't be able to tackle all of it in an hour, but we're going to hit a lot of the high notes. And after that, I'll ask questions for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions, which will filter through Caitlin. So I just ask our panelists to come on video. So Ms. Goodman, Admiral McGinn, Dr. Holdren, I see all of you. So we wanted to start today. I want to introduce the Honorable Sherri Goodman. Sherri, wave, who is the Senior Strategist and Advisory Board Member at the Center for Climate and Security, Chair of the Board at the Council on Strategic Risks, Secretary General of the International Military Council on Climate and Security, and a Senior Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center's Polar Institute and Environmental Change and Security Program. Over her 30-year career, Ms. Goodman served as the President and CEO of the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, Senior Vice President and General Counsel for the Center for Naval Analyses, where she was also the founder and executive director of the CNA Military Advisory Board. She was also the first Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security. Dr. John Holdren is the Harvard Kennedy School, is with the Harvard Kennedy School as the Teresa and John Hines Professor of Environmental Policy. He is the co-director of the school's Science, Technology, and Public Policy program, Professor of Environmental Science and Policy in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences. He is also a faculty affiliate at the Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Science. Before rejoining Harvard, he was a senior advisor to President Barack Obama on science and technology issues through his roles as Assistant to the President for Science and Technology and Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and co-chair of the President's Council on Advisors on Science and Technology. He also taught at Harvard for 13 years and the University of California, Berkeley for more than 2 decades. Vice Admiral Dennis McGinn is a member of the Center for Climate and Security Advisory Board and former Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Installations, and Environment. He is Assistant Secretary of the Naval and Energy, Installations, and Environment from September 2013 until January 2017, where he led the transformation of naval installations toward greater mission resiliency through energy efficiency and renewable energy, microgrids, and other technologies. Previously, he served on active duty in the Navy for 35 years, attaining the rank of Vice Admiral. He served as Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Warfare Requirements and Programs, overseeing the development of future naval capabilities, and he previously commanded the United States Third Fleet. He's a former president of the American Council on Renewable Energy, where he led efforts to communicate the economic, security, and environmental benefits of renewable energy. He's also a past member of the steering committee of the Energy Future Coalition, the Bipartisan Center Energy Board, and co-chairman of the CNA Military Advisory Board. And I realize that is a lot of titles for all three of our panelists, but I really want our audience to understand the great privilege we have to hear from all of you and the length of time and the focus in your career that you've devoted to this topic. So Ms. Goodman, I'd love to start with you today. Thank you so much for being with us. It's fair to say that you've been at the center of U.S. national security consideration of climate change since the beginning of our recognition that it had national security implications. I know that thank you so much for being willing to offer your 5 minutes perspective to tee it up. So in terms of geopolitics, can you talk a little bit about how you see climate as a security threat?
Absolutely, Kristen, and thank you to you and Erin and Paul and Caitlin and all of you helping to convene this conference today. It's terrific to be with all of you. And thank you also for that generous introduction. What also goes along with it is I'm a graduate of Harvard Kennedy School and Harvard Law School. And if you had told me back 30 years ago, when I was a student at the Kennedy School and later on an adjunct teaching fellow teaching the program analysis evaluation class, the capstone class, that I'd be working on climate and security, when at the time I was working on things like how do you end a nuclear war and what kind of nuclear arms control methods we needed, I would have laughed because we weren't doing anything on environmental security. But I say sometimes my career has gone from weapons to waste, now to water and climate. So for those of you who are students tuning in, your careers can take quite a trajectory. Even when I served as the first Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security in the 1990s, while we were seized with integrating environment across the Department of Defense and military activities, a lot of it was focused on cleaning up past pollution, complying with air, water, and waste laws, and conserving natural resources, all continuing important functions. But it was really later in the decade, around the time of the Kyoto Protocol in the late 90s, we began to pay more attention to global climate impacts and impacts of climate change, both on military activities as they contribute and how you could turn that corner and make it an opportunity. And I would say when in 2007, I founded the CNA Military Advisory Board, which Admiral McGinn was a member of, with a dozen senior retired military leaders. And we spent a year with climate scientists like Dr. Holdren and many of his colleagues, learning from them about climate science. And most of the generals and admirals I worked with at the time said, Sherri, we don't, well, this climate stuff, we're war fighters, okay? But at the end of it, we declared climate change to be a threat multiplier for instability in fragile regions of the world. And yesterday, both John Kerry and U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield used that framing, threat multiplier, in describing, in characterizing climate impacts. So what does that mean, both in a national security sense and for you all, particularly aspiring or intelligence professionals? So both Avril Haines and Secretary of Defense Austin spoke to this yesterday, that climate change is now a destabilizing force in everything we do, from rising sea levels to collapsing permafrost, to rising temperatures, persistent drought, unpredictable and more intense tropical storms and hurricanes, rampant wildfires, and floods, both coastal and riverine. We are seeing these impacts now on a daily basis in our own country and around the world. And there are both those direct threats, those direct threat multipliers I just described. And then there are the secondary effects, the most vivid of which is the global migration challenge that we face today, with more people displaced than at any time since World War II. And increasingly, they are displaced because of climate change. In our own hemisphere, much of Central America is at risk now, Guatemala, Honduras, because of the intense storms, hurricanes, 2 devastating hurricanes coming on top of persistent drought that's devastated the coffee crop and caused rampant food and water insecurity, combined with corruption, political instability. So it's a convergence of destabilizing forces that are displacing people around the world. Think of the Arctic, where, of course, Dr. Holdren has also been a real leader, helped convene the first Arctic Science Ministerial. This is a region that during the Cold War, the early post-Cold War period, was primarily for us about submarines and space forces. And, we prevented a bolt out of the blue nuclear attack by the Soviet Union through our efforts during the Cold War. But now a whole new ocean has opened in our lifetime. And Russia sees the opportunity to monetize its vast northern sea route as a toll road for transport from ports in Asia across to Europe, and is rebuilding its military infrastructure. China has aspirations for a polar Silk Road and sees itself as a near Arctic stakeholder. The US is struggling to catch up in its capabilities to operate in an Arctic that could be ice-free for half the year within another decade. So we have a whole new area that has both opportunities for further cooperation, but also elements of potential tension and competition. So now, that's some of where we are today. The opportunity now with these great climate risks and destabilizing risks is to turn the corner, both as we decarbonize and to lead by example. In the national security community, of course, the military, being the nation's single largest energy user, can lead by example in how it becomes more energy efficient, adopts microgrids and other green technologies, better batteries, and many other ways. The intelligence community too can lead by example, I think, in making this a higher priority, as DNI Haynes said yesterday, and integrating it across the range of analysis and collection activities it undertakes in ways that will give us more power and capability to climate proof our future in a variety of ways. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks. Admiral McGinn, thank you too for being with us today. Given your extensive background serving as a senior civilian in DoD and as a military officer, we'd very much appreciate hearing your remarks and on today's topic from your perspective.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. And I want to really focus on some of the key remarks that Sherri Goodman made. The term threat multiplier for instability came out of the Military Advisory Board of CNA. Sherri, we affectionately described as the room mother of us retired admirals and generals who came to learn a lot about climate change and its direct effect on national security. So when you have a scan of the world, you see all kinds of fault lines along ethnic, political, economic, religious lines. Some of them are hot. There are hot wars going on around the Arabian Gulf. There's always existing tensions in South Asia, down in Africa and Central America. These are fault lines that have many different causes. But the thing about climate change in the extreme weather events, ranging, as Sherri said, from drought of multi-years to floods, riverine and ocean, et cetera, they pressurize these fault lines and they cause fragile societies and fragile governments to fail. It creates a tremendous vacuum into which all manner of bad things can happen. Illegal drug trade, human trafficking, paramilitaries, terrorists, And it's all because people have lost a safety net, if you will, of security. Quality of life plummets as these societies and the government ability to help those societies becomes inactive or ineffective. So that creates a lot more scenarios in which the United States military and our allies and partner nations are going to be called. Business is going to get busier because of that instability in our need to protect regional security and indeed global security. It ranges from on the low end of military operations spectrum to humanitarian assistance, disaster recovery. Think a major typhoon in the Philippines, of which there are way, way too many, and they become more and more intense and more frequent. And that's not just confined to the Western Pacific, but all around that tropical zone. It goes to regional conflicts where competition for scarce and getting scarcer resources because of that pressurized climate change effect becomes conflict. Think competition for water that will increasingly become unpredictable in the 4 major rivers of South Asia, in Africa, et cetera. So the idea here is there's going to be a lot more business, unfortunately, to try to maintain some type of stability. What can we do about it? Obviously, we need to recognize that climate change and the effects of climate change are already here. And it's not going to get better based on very, very validated predictive models. As things warm up, like the ocean, the atmosphere, and land masses, these weather effects are going to become even more intense and more frequent and more widespread. It's tough though, because unlike a traditional military threat, climate change doesn't happen on a particular time frame in a fairly acute way. It can when these weather events occur, certainly, but over time, a good way to describe it is former Navy oceanographer Dave Titley predicted. If you look out on the ocean from the seashore, you can see a bunch of waves, and you can say, well, they're large, they're small, they're coming in one direction or another, they're turbulent or they're smooth. That is like weather. However, climate change, occurring as it does over a much longer period of time, is like the tide. It is inevitable and it is predictable, and that is what is happening in our world. So we need to be more prepared to make our military and our partner militaries as resilient as they possibly can, to build in through civil works projects, through everything from tabletop exercises to actual projects, to help make military installations and the surrounding civilian communities much more resilient to these adverse effects of climate. So that's just a few opening remarks. I look forward to addressing any questions that may come up. For some, this is a fairly new idea of climate change and national security. I mean, what's with that? The report that Sherri mentioned back in 2007 was groundbreaking. Prior to that time, it was, I'll stereotype, environmentalists yelling across the table at big business saying, "You are ruining the world for us and our children and grandchildren." Big business yelling back, "Hey, you don't get it. Our quality of life, our economic opportunities are directly related to what we do. We can't be concerned about every little environmental issue." Enter into that talking space retired military with extensive decades, hundreds of years worth of military experience in peace and war, saying, "Hey, look, this is a national security threat in the traditional sense of the word. We have to take it seriously. We have to do it in terms of adaptation, and we need to do it to mitigate, to try to avoid the worst degrees of warming in the future." And that's what the summit was about yesterday. And we need to now put in place implementation plans to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the comments you made just resonated, that when military officers with such a vast array of experience and people like Sherri with I have not heard the room mother remark, but I've heard the godmother of climate change and national security analysis remark many times. But when people like you engage in that dialogue, it added to the level of seriousness and commitment which has brought us to this moment, actually, with yesterday's summit. Dr. Holdren, thank you too for being with us today. You've previously said that to fix the problem, society only has 3 options: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering. We're already doing some of each, and we will do more of all 3. I know that's not an optimistic backdrop to start with, but I'd really like to hear your perspective on climate and national security in that 5 minutes. And we'll dig much more into all of these issues as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Kristen. I actually understood that my assignment was to talk in particular about the migration challenge, to elaborate on some of the points that were already made about the very serious issue of migration driven by climate change and its impact on national and international security. And that's what I am going to mainly focus on. I want to start by talking about exactly how climate change impacts can influence migration. I'm going to do that in 2 parts. One is, what are the key phenomena connected with climate change? And secondly, what are the biggest human impacts of those phenomena that can affect migration? And then I'll talk about the resulting numbers of migrants and the uncertainties surrounding that, and I'll try to do it all in 5 minutes. The relevant climate change phenomena, the key climate change phenomena, are, as has been mentioned already, sea level rise, more frequent, hotter, longer heat waves, hotter and longer wildfires, longer and drier droughts, altered distribution and virulence of pests and pathogens, increasing torrential downpours. Turns out when the earth warms, the atmosphere holds more water. When it holds more can come down at one time, and it does. Ocean heating and acidification, the increasing power of storms are, I think, the big ones. The impacts that can affect migration, the impacts on human beings and human values and human prosperity, roughly in likely order of impact on migration, I would list them as follows: the inundation of coastal regions and low-lying inhabited islands, including, of course, island states, resulting from sea level rise, heat stress and heat stroke. It turns out that very hot weather reduces the capacity to work outside, to work in construction, in agriculture, in fisheries, in forestry, and ultimately it reduces that capacity to 0. You get to the point where the combination of temperature and humidity make it fatal to try to work outside. Already in many parts of the world, it is the case that in the warmest months of the year, it has already become impossible for people to work outside in any sort of heavy activity. And the area and the duration over which that is the case are both increasing rapidly. Crop failures, the next in line, I think, although the order could be wrong. It could turn out that crop failures are an even bigger impact than heat stress and heat stroke. But in any case, crop failures could result from combinations of heat waves, droughts, wildfires, more torrential downpours, more pests and pathogens. The multiple stress problem is a big one, where most of the stresses are stresses arising from climate change, but other stresses interact with those and compound the problem. Fisheries collapse from ocean heating and acidification, pathogens, changes in ocean circulation, another potential big one in terms of driving people away from their traditional homes and livelihoods. Increased frequency and intensity of storms, of floods, of storm damage coming from the fact that the power of the strongest storms is increasing over much of the world. That was predicted, by the way, by climate science long before it was observed, but it's now extremely observable. The biggest tropical storms in virtually every basin subject to tropical storms have occurred over the last 10 years. Let me turn to the question under the heading of what's ahead. Where is all this going? what are going to be the resulting numbers of migrants? And it turns out that's a very tough question. As Sherri Goodman has pointed out, climate-driven migration is already growing. It's already conspicuous. It's becoming a larger part of total migration. But for a variety of reasons, we still don't know quantitatively how big it's going to get and how fast. Let me mention very quickly the uncertainties. The biggest uncertainty, in a sense, is what human society decides to do. In the last day, we have seen world leaders coming together and in many cases increase the ambition of their pledges to mitigate the emissions coming from their countries, in some cases to increase assistance from wealthy countries to countries in need to help them not only with their own mitigation, but with adaptation. But we really don't know. Nobody has a clear crystal ball of the extent to which these kinds of pledges will actually be carried out over the next decade, the next 2 decades, the next 3. And that is the biggest single uncertainty in the future of climate change impacts and in the future of climate change migration. How much will human society do to reduce these threats? Even if we knew exactly how much effort would go into mitigation, how much emissions would be reduced, there would still be some uncertainty about the size of the increase in temperature that would result, and some uncertainty about the geographic distribution of those increases. The future magnitude of sea level rise is quite uncertain. We have good reason to believe that over the long run, sea level will go up by something like 2.5 meters for every degree Celsius that the global average surface temperature increases. But nobody knows exactly how fast that will happen. That's obviously a big issue when it comes to whether society is able to some extent to adapt, to move settlements inland, take other measures to deal with sea level rise, or whether it will occur at a rate that makes that impossible and just drives people in very large numbers away from coastlines and across international boundaries. We are not entirely confident about the response of agriculture globally to multiple stresses and the increases in those of the stresses that are arising from climate change. The ocean's response to multiple stresses is similarly not accurately predictable. We know there's going to be a substantial response, but when somebody says exactly how much, how fast, nobody can really say. And finally, of the people who are forced to move by these different impacts and their combination, how many will move internally and how many will cross national boundaries? In the literature of this question, which has been growing almost as rapidly as climate change itself, there's a quite wide range of estimates of what the total impacts on migration are going to be. But let me say that all of them are large. The question is between large, very large, and extremely large. And this is certainly going to pose an enormous set of challenges for the international security system. I will stop there and we'll see what comes up in the question and answers.
Great. Thank you very much, all 3 of you. You have painted a very stark picture of where we are and the deep expertise that you bring to it over the length of time you've been studying these issues. For our panel, we're going to tackle the national security and international security perspective with follow-on panels dealing specifically with the intelligence community. But I did want to touch on one issue, and I want to ask this to John. In intelligence analysis, we have this thing called confidence levels, and we have to make a call on things that's pretty sparse sometimes. So we'll say with low, medium, or high confidence. And based on a puzzle that has maybe 14 of the 40 pieces you need, and you're going forward making judgments, and the nation makes decisions based on that kind of information. If we think about climate science by comparison, the data over decades is rigorous scientifically in a different way. And I wondered, you would be really ideally the person to ask about this juxtaposition. We've moved militaries and and our national security establishment on much, much less information. Can you tell me a little bit about, have you observed this or noted this, the standard for which people examine or people assess that climate change is actually happening versus what we see in other topics?
No, it's a great question. And I often start my public presentations on climate change by saying that there is enormous scientific confidence in the fundamentals of climate change, that it's real, that it's accelerating, that it's caused by human activities, that it's already doing harm, that it will get bigger before we are able to stop it. And the one encouraging point on which there is high confidence is we will be a lot better off if we take aggressive action, both to reduce our emissions and to adapt to the changes in climate that we can no longer avoid, than if we don't do those things. When you get into the details, as I was mentioning in the case of migration, there are indeed many uncertainties. And sometimes climate change skeptics or climate change minimizers will point to those uncertainties and claim that they mean we know essentially nothing. And that is absolutely wrong. The uncertainties are about the details. The big picture, as I've just described it, is completely clear. We know that what is coming is going to be worse than what we're already experiencing. And what we're already experiencing, what we've actually observed, which is not legitimately a subject of controversy. We know what we've observed. It's been documented extensively. What we have observed and are observing is climate change is already doing very significant damage in the United States and around the world, even more in developing countries than in wealthy ones. So when you talk about confidence, you need to be pretty specific about whether you're talking about the very big things we know for sure or the little things on which there's uncertainty. But you're absolutely right in pointing out that in the military space, we have often taken extensive and expensive action on the basis of much less certainty and much less confidence than we have about climate change. I had the privilege of making that particular argument to Madeleine Albright during the Clinton administration, that I pointed out that during the Cold War, we made enormous investments, spent literally trillions of dollars, basically against the possibility that the Soviet Union intended to invade and occupy Western Europe. That was the fundamental question. And we knew much less about Soviet intentions and even about Soviet capabilities when we made those decisions than we know now about climate change. Interestingly, I was a little worried that Secretary Albright might have taken the opportunity to point out to me all the shortcomings in that comparison, but she did not. What she said was, Professor Holdren, you're absolutely right. And she went on to say, the problem is, in the case of the Cold War, we had a plan. In the case of climate change, we have no plan. That was 1997, before the Kyoto Conference. We have a much better plan now, and that is a cause for celebration.
Thank you so much for that granularity. I think that's really important to get the difference between the big muscle movement, so to speak, of climate change and not knowing the specifics of how they play out. But there's no question that we're seeing this across the board play out in ways that are dire and expensive. To your point, the damage to the US economy has been significant, and that's true for nations around the world. Sherri, I wanted to turn to you really to talk about geopolitics. So we think about relations with our allies and adversaries and how they're being affected differently based on their spot on the globe and the construct of their nations. We all face this challenge, as we saw today, or saw yesterday and a little bit today, from other nations. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I really wanted to get your sense of how you see this shifting geopolitics moving, how it already has shifted them, and how you see it shifting geopolitics moving forward.
Okay, Kristen, yeah, there are many particular ways. So let me just address a couple of them. One is competition's now shifted, geostrategic competition, to climate leadership. The US and China, in many ways, are both competing to be climate and clean energy leaders. Now, yesterday and today, it's been characterized at the summit as a race to the top. So we should compete. The new administration says we should be competing to develop and export and innovate the green and clean energy technologies we need to power our future. And yes, that's true. We will be competing with China in many of those areas. We will be competing and cooperating, co-opetition, it's sometimes called, to who can reduce emissions more quickly. So those are some, at the same time, we are, China is our major strategic competitor, and there are many ways in which they're trying to disrupt the global governance system. And we're going to be checking them at every point on that while we're competing with them economically in the new energy sphere. Russia's also really an interesting case here. Russia, some would argue, is maybe a nearer term winner. As temperatures warm, it gains more agricultural area and has an opening Arctic with economic opportunities. And Russia does have 20% of its GDP that it derives from Arctic activities, more than any other Arctic nation. On the other hand, its infrastructure arguably is in worse condition than even our own failing infrastructure in the US. And they have a lot of Arctic infrastructure. The permafrost is collapsing there. And if they don't move quickly to diversify their resource-based economy, they could suffer stranded assets in their fossil and mining industries as the globe begins to decarbonize at a faster pace than they can diversify their economies. You see many Gulf countries now that also are resource economies, fossil dependent, working hard to diversify and become solar leaders, desalination, nuclear technologies. They're really working hard, and all the technologies like carbon capture that will be needed to make fossil fuels more energy sustainable. So you see those geopolitics changing. You also see, for example, in the UN, that the combined forces of the small island states with other nations that want climate action, particularly many European and Nordic states and others, has become a powerful force within the UN system. And while we kind of ignored the UN climate mechanism that was evolved by Germany and some other European countries over the last few in the last administration, now the US is rejoining and wants to lead on that. So I think you'll see a lot more dedicated action. And I also think the other area where this is changing is as climate threat multipliers continue to worsen, and we see more and more humanitarian assistance and disaster relief driven by climate events. Nations from China to the US and others are going to factor this into their strategies, not only to rescue those at risk, but also to put forward how they can promote presence and engagement and alliances and partnerships around the world. You see China taking this up across the South Pacific, while the US was a little bit less engaged over the last decade. Now we've re-engaged, or intend to at least. And I think that, we're going to be, you're going to see the geopolitics around climate and disasters affecting relationships, alliances, and partnerships as well, where China can offer, through its Belt and Road or other initiatives, attractive alliances and partnerships. We're going to be competing for those relationships and those alliances.
It's what you're describing really is it's a shift in economies, but also a shift in the way we compete. And it's something that the Chinese have been doing for quite some time with their focus on solar. And as you said, the Gulf economies, while we think of them as oil rich and the focus on oil, they're really starting to have the conversation about solar and desalination and the other things you're talking about. So it's going to be fascinating as unfortunately climate change continues to evolve, to see how this affects economies worldwide, but also how these trends that you're identifying continue to play out. I do want to come back to the United States a little bit, to Dennis, if I can. And I want to ask you in a little more granularity about what the Defense Department has seen in terms of the effects of climate change on its own systems. We talked about being called upon much more frequently to provide humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. But I know that you've been heavily involved for decades about its effect on installations and mission. And could you talk a little bit about that to the audience?
Sure, absolutely, Kristen. Before I do, I just want to make a quick comment about the business of uncertainty, dealing with uncertainty, and what if we really don't know what it's going to be. Retired Army General Gordon Sullivan, former Chief of Staff of the Army, was the leader of the first Military Advisory Board report in 2007, 14 years ago. He said, we never have 100% certainty. If you wait for 100% certainty on the battlefield, bad things are going to happen. And the bad things that are going to happen, we're already seeing in manifesting themselves in these extreme weather events. So the other point I would make goes to the economic discussion that you and Sherri just had. The things that we do to deal with the challenges of climate change are not a zero-sum game. We can create economic growth, higher quality of life. I love the quote by a former Saudi oil minister when he said, we must remember that the Stone Age did not end because we ran out of stones. We found things like iron and bronze that were much more effective. We are finding sources of energy, wind, geothermal, solar, et cetera, storage capabilities that are much better. And you just need to look at the economic figures of the job creation in the clean energy sector compared to fossil fuel. It's unbelievably, it's a factor of 5 or perhaps even more in terms of job creation. Now, to installations. The Department of Defense is rightly concerned, as are many in the private sector, about the adverse effects of climate change on our existing infrastructure. 2018, Hurricane Michael came roaring up from the Gulf of Mexico and practically ruined completely Tyndall Air Force Base to the tune of $5 billion. And that's $5 billion to restore the capabilities at Tyndall that could have been used in so many other areas, but because of the need to repair from that hurricane damage. The year before that, Hurricane Florence hit the Carolinas. Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, $3.6 billion in damage. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Offutt Air Force Base near Omaha, Nebraska, because of the flooding of the Missouri River, basically had their runway shut down for months to the tune of damage of $1 billion. And oh, by the way, Offutt Air Force Base is the headquarters for the Strategic Command, which is responsible for the command and control of our nuclear arsenal. So these are very, very real. The list goes on and on, not just in the United States, but overseas as well. Dr. Holgren mentioned wildfires. Wildfires in the United States and overseas directly affect the ability of the US military and our allies to practice realistically the kinds of skills that we need in a more traditional warfighting capability. So we have to consider our installations in the United States and around the world as the launch pads for any kind of military capability we need to use, from high-end kinetic right on down to humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. These are the installations from which the power generates and originates, and we need to keep them viable. The department has recognized this. There are some new climate assessment tool mechanisms and models that are being used, and they will be increasingly populated with the kind of analysis that will give us a sense of where are the priority fixes, if you will, to get the kind of resilience in our military installations that are absolutely essential to keep them viable.
Really important context. Added to that, we've had more than $10 billion storms a year for at least the last decade. So the effect of on the economy much more broadly is also very significant.
Yep.
John, I wanted to turn to you briefly to talk about the Arctic. Sherri gave us some good overview of what's happening there. And if you have looked at this for longer than most of us, Could you give us a sense of what's happening there and why it matters to the United States?
Sure. Thank you for that question. First of all, for very fundamental reasons, the Arctic is warming more rapidly by far than the global average warming, about 3 times faster than the global average. It's the fastest changing environment in the world in terms of climate change. That matters not just to the 4 million people who live in the Arctic, which is not so many. It matters, of course, acutely to them as they experience drastic increases in storm damage because the sea ice that used to protect them from storms is shrinking. They are experiencing major impacts on the subsistence hunting and fishing resources on which the indigenous people depend, but also big changes in the fisheries resources on which commercial operations depend. They're experiencing high rates of permafrost thaw with impacts undermining buildings, pipelines, highways, and more. They are experiencing increased flows and turbidity in their rivers as a result of rapid glacier melt. But the impact on the world as a whole, the reasons that everybody should care, whether or not you care about the 4 million people who live in the Arctic, is that the rapid rate of melting of the Greenland ice sheet is a major contributor to global sea level rise. The rapid increase in the rate of melting of glaciers across much of the Arctic is also a major contribution to sea level rise. And the permafrost thaw is producing emissions of both carbon dioxide and methane, which are adding to the global burden of those globally mixed gases and accelerating climate change as a whole. Again, there is uncertainty in detail about the rate and pace at which the thawing permafrost will be emitting CO2 and methane in the future, but we know basically that the answer is big. The question is only how big, and how big a bite will that take out of what is sometimes called the carbon budget? How much can society release without crossing thresholds that lead to greatly increased danger? In addition, the fact that the Arctic is warming so much more rapidly than the mid-latitudes is changing atmospheric and oceanic circulation patterns in ways that are influencing climate all down through the mid-latitudes. One of the phenomena that we recently experienced in Texas with extreme cold over a long number of days is very likely attributable to the weakening of the polar vortex that results from the reduced temperature difference between the mid-latitudes and the Arctic. That weakening of the polar vortex leads to lobes of cold Arctic air penetrating far south into the mid-latitudes and alternating lobes of warm mid-latitude air penetrating into the Arctic. So we end up with this bizarre phenomenon of seeing more or less simultaneously extremes of cold in the mid-latitudes and extremes of warmth in the Arctic, accelerating problems there. So climate change in the Arctic is a really big deal for everybody, not just for those who live there, although it's a plenty big deal for them as well.
Thank you for that. It's a very difficult development that you're describing. And then, of course, Russian and Chinese competition that Sherri talked about there creates further reasons that we need to pay attention to it. I would love to keep all of you to myself and ask many more questions, but I know that the audience has many questions, and I wanted to invite Caitlin to return to the conversation to share some of those with us.
Hi, Kristen, thank you. And I just want to apologize to the audience that I do have construction going on outside, so I apologize if there's any distraction. Our first question is from Ran. We see competitions between US and China in the climate change area, but is there any low-hanging fruit that still has space for the two sides to cooperate on? Also, what should the Biden government take care to protect national security when starting more cooperation with China on climate change?
So let me start on that one, because I happen to be one of the principal investigators of a joint project with Chinese scientists and policymakers centered at Tsinghua University that's focused on comparative analysis of pathways toward deep carbon reductions in both countries, comparing notes, identifying best practices and sharing them, understanding which technologies have the greatest potential, which of those would it make sense for us to work together on. So the fact is, it is not just theoretical whether there are possibilities for collaboration between China and the United States on climate change. It's ongoing, and not just in my program, but in other university programs around the country and National Academy of Sciences interactions. And I would note that the joint US-China Center for Clean Energy Technology Research, which was established early in the Obama administration, actually continued to function even through the Trump administration. I assume that's probably because President Trump didn't notice, and nobody in the Department of Energy, which runs that operation on the US side, called their attention to it. But we can expect that effort to ramp up. There is every reason to collaborate with China on energy efficiency, every reason to collaborate with China on carbon capture and sequestration, keeping carbon that would otherwise be emitted to the atmosphere out of the atmosphere. And we can expect to see that ramp up on a government-to-government basis, I believe, now that we have an administration that understands the challenge of climate change. It's very clear to me, by the way, from my own interactions with Chinese leaders on this, and the leaders I interact with include the top advisors to President Xi on this, that the Chinese are serious not only about addressing the problem, but they're serious about the value of collaboration in doing so.
Vice Admiral McGinn, did you want to answer that question as well?
I completely agree. There's more things to cooperate on when we have a common enemy called climate change with China and the US. It is in both nations' interest to cooperate wherever possible. And clearly, we're not going to suddenly wake up and find all of our differences solved. But when you start on the areas where you have a common understanding and common benefit going forward, economically, in terms of quality of life, human health, that's a good place to start. And I think that we can, over the next several years, see even more areas of cooperation that are related to the transition to a new energy economy globally.
Thank you. Our next question, how can climate security be more emphasized in the UN? And does the US support the Planetary Security Initiative?
Well, I think the current administration would support the Planetary Security Initiative that was launched several years ago in The Hague with Dutch partners. The Center for Climate and Security is a partner in the Planetary Security Initiative, where we launched the International Military Council on Climate and Security just 2 years ago, which I co-lead with the former Dutch Chief of Defense. I think the concept and the spirit of it are very much in line with the goals and objectives of the Biden administration. I think we're going to return to an active role in the UN climate security mechanism, which was shaped in the last couple of years by Germany and others. And I expect to see a more active US role in shaping that, aligned with the ambitious agenda the administration's laid out for COP26 of achieving a net zero emissions in economies by 2050 and advancing green technologies, and then working together for resilience and adaptation measures to reduce the risk to those who are most vulnerable in society.
Thank you, Sherri. Our next question is from Norman Rule. Drought, temperature rise, and instability will hit the Middle East hard. During a recent trip to the region, I was struck by the enthusiasm from green technologies by Saudi and Emirati leadership, both to protect the climate and to build their economies. Do your guests see the region as a source of hope or concern? Are there countries in Africa or Latin America that are showing leadership on this issue?
Yeah, I answered his question online too. I do see hope, particularly in the UAE, in Saudi, and maybe some other countries where they see the opportunity, economic opportunity, and also where their leadership is committed to improving diversity, which has been lacking, particularly gender diversity in that region. But there are some efforts now to include women and give them opportunities. And I think that's going to be important across much of the Middle East and particularly in the Sahel. So I see opportunities for hope if they can work quickly enough. Now, the wealthy economies can certainly do that. UAE and Saudi all have that within their grasp. In Africa, I think Nigeria, Kenya, perhaps Tanzania, also all with ambitious goals, parts of particularly Western Africa, Ghana, Sierra Leone, very active. We're all represented by their leaders at the climate conference. In Latin America, Colombia, Chile in particular has been a model of climate leadership and the blue economy, seeing opportunities to really take opportunities to improve ocean health, biodiversity through marine protected areas and reduce climate risk, so much of which is absorbed by our oceans. And as fish stocks migrate and ocean health deteriorates from plastics and other environmental degradation, that's of increasing concern.
Thank you, Sherri. Our next question is from Alan. Do you feel that a global expansion of nuclear power is going to be a significant wedge for a solution to clean power? And how might that create a greater risk for nuclear weapons proliferation?
I'll start, Kristen, by saying that nuclear power, clean nuclear power, base load, has to be a part of our clean energy future. However, it has to be done recognizing all of the lessons learned. In the United States, for example, 20% of our electricity is produced by nuclear power plants. We need to keep them healthy and safe and ongoing in terms of producing electrons to power our economy and all of the end uses that are essential, especially as we continue to electrify many of the functions. But as new forms of nuclear power, small modular reactors start getting further down the road of research, development, deployment, and pilot programs, I think we can do it well. And the idea of having future nuclear power far, far less liable to be used in terms of nuclear proliferation is a very, very key design goal of the development of new nuclear power.
I agree with all of that, and I would just stress a couple of points. It's very clear that it will be considerably easier to address the global climate change challenge if we have nuclear energy available to make an important contribution. Having it available to make that important contribution does require progress on a number of fronts. It requires continuing efforts to make nuclear power plants less expensive, continuing efforts to ensure that as we make them less expensive, we also make them at least as safe as the best current nuclear power plants, and preferably even safer in the anticipation that large numbers will be deployed. We need to find an approach to the management of radioactive waste that is acceptable not only technically, but which the public will accept. And we need to ensure, and the Admiral referred to this briefly, we need to ensure that we pursue nuclear power only in forms that will not contribute to the proliferation of nuclear weapons capability. And that actually requires some real choices. Some of the advanced nuclear options that are currently under examination and the focuses of considerable enthusiasm for some quarters would involve the production, recycling, circulation of large quantities of weapon-usable plutonium. We should avoid that approach to the future of nuclear energy.
Do you have some more, Caitlin?
Yes, I do. I have quite a few questions here. The next question that I have is from sorry, one second. The next question I have is from an anonymous attendee who is asking, is eco and green terrorism a possible risk?
Well, we've seen eco-terrorism in the form of environmental activists being killed in places like Brazil. I mean, I met over a decade ago, I met with a woman whose brother was killed because he had been among those protesting the encroachment by farmers onto native agricultural lands. So yes, that has already happened. And you know, we have to fight against that and enable those who are victims of it to stand up against that. Now, I mean, there's the other related point to that is that water in particular has been weaponized in recent years in parts of the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa, and the Sahel actually, as water becomes more scarce. And it was used in Iraq and Syria to deprive vulnerable populations of water they need just to survive, and then enable them to conform or to strategically target, like the Moselle Dam. So you could see that as a form of eco-terrorism as well.
So
You
if
share.
I could, Caitlin, I'd like to take a moderator's prerogative to ask a final question in a lightning round to each of you. And we didn't get much of a chance to talk about yesterday's summit and all of the things that have come out of it. And I think we'll be digesting it for some time. But just to each of you, what was one very important thing that you thought you heard or came out of the summit yesterday? And what do you think it will mean? What might it mean for us going forward? And John, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Let me start by saying I think it was very important and symbolic that President Xi and President Putin both participated in that summit. The other thing that struck me beyond the importance of President Biden's commitment was that so many other major countries made commitments, many of them improving on the ambition of their Paris commitments. So I was extremely encouraged.
That's great. Dennis, what about you?
I would take away the fact that Secretary of Defense Austin, in his remarks, his participation in the summit is all in, not just he personally as the leader of the Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Defense, but the whole idea of the national security establishment being all in on doing something about climate change is really, really key. And it's not just let's adapt to the increasingly challenging weather and climate challenges. Sure, it's that. But it's also what can we do to mitigate and reduce our greenhouse gases through much greater efficiency in military operations, substitution of clean energy for fossil fuel. It won't happen overnight, but to start down that road, we can use commercial technology, bringing it into the military operations where it makes sense for the mission, and we can have military research, development, and deployment help put capabilities out in the civilian private sector that can be very, very helpful to the entire economy in addressing this climate change challenge.
Important. Sherri, what about you?
I do think this was a transformative moment to see a president within his first 100 days of office bring global leaders together on climate change. Despite the fact that some of us have been working on this for decades, it is really now front and center, not only in national security, foreign policy, and intelligence, where it should be, and it will infuse all of that, but in every sector of society. From transportation to building to energy systems to agriculture, and the countries from around the world, as has already been said, to see the presidents, the leaders of Russia and China, but also Nigeria and the UAE and Kenya, and I mean many countries you don't necessarily associate with climate leadership. Coming all in, and it's all about transforming the energy systems and society and lifting up those and protecting those most vulnerable and infusing and ensuring a just transition for all sectors of society and all generations going forward. So it was a very hopeful message. Now we have to run like heck to keep up with those commitments and turn them into reality. But I'm heartened that with leaders like we saw in the last 2 days, and particularly as was said, Secretary of Defense, the Director of National Intelligence, they don't make commitments that they aren't determined to deliver on. So now the stage is set.
Thank you. John, did you have a final thought? I saw your note.
John had to drop off for another commitment.
Well, so Vice Admiral and Honorable Sherri Goodman and Dr. Holdren, thank you so much for your time today. I think we all learned a lot, and I know we wish we had more, but we want to turn down to the second session. So Caitlin, do you want to show us the way?
Sure, absolutely. So everyone should have a link for the next panel, which will start at 1:30. There'll be a 15-minute break between now and the next panel, and we'll be discussing the role of the U.S. intelligence community in addressing climate change. So we look forward to seeing you there.
Thanks, Kristen and Caitlin. Great job.
Thank you all. Terrific
Thank
to
you all.
with everyone today.
Thank you so much.
Bye.